Your evaluation of the sector, I mean, I've just introduced many exciting and new changes into the sector. Are you bullish?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, yes, we are very bullish at the sector. The growth has been very good, and we are anticipating further growth at least going forward in the coming days.
Okay, now let's just talk about the state of the aviation sector. I know that in East Africa, the dominant player is Qatar Airways. It's regarded as probably the model to emulate across Africa in terms of a public-private partnership. Tell us how they've done it and how they've done it well, and what lessons we can all learn across Africa.
Well, I think what Kenya has done very well is basically trying to balance what is the business model. Their focus seems to be more on Africa, and I think that's a market which has been ignored for quite some time, and that's where they intend to get most of their growth in the days going forward. Also, I think of late they've started concentrating more on the emerging markets, especially when you look at the Kenyan business trends towards Southeast Asia and China. So I think that's where the growth is going to be for Qatar Airways.
Unfortunately for them, though, there was that horrible situation with the air crash in Cameroon, and it's raised a lot of concern across Africa about safety standards. We're told that in Africa, generally, we've got the poorest safety standards records, and we're 6 times worse than what they are in Asia, 12 times worse than what they are in Europe. How does East Africa fare?
I think for the East African market, we are much, much better. I think the challenge in the past was that there wasn't enough regulation, and the regulators did not have enough capacity to oversight the airlines that were operating in Africa. And I think what has actually happened, especially in the East African market, is that Kenya, being the leader, has taken the bull by the horns. We have worked very hard towards building our capacity, especially of our inspectors, both for the airworthiness and also for the flight safety. We've also partnered with the East African community countries, whereby we have formed an organization called CASOA, that is a Civil Aviation Security and Oversight Agency based out of Kampala, and we are able to actually pool our resources together for inspectors and actually ensure safety. When you look at the East African region, we've not had any major air crashes in the region, and the market is really growing pretty well, and I think this is a way we've been working together.
Increasingly, there are calls to liberalize African airspace in line with the Yamoussoukro decisions, but research suggests that many African countries are still very protective of their aviation industries because they fear that liberalization literally means that local operators are going to be swamped by competition from other regions and mainly from foreign entities. What's the situation like in East Africa, especially as we move into consolidation through the common market?
Yes, of course, there are always those challenges in terms of protectionism, especially for countries. But I think from when you look at the Kenyan perspective, we look at it that if you don't do it in a gradual manner, if the African countries don't manage to effect the Yamoussoukro declaration, then what's going to happen eventually will get to the international level, whereby free skies and open skies will be open to everyone, and the African carriers will not be strong enough to compete with the international carriers. For us, we see that African countries need to start opening up to each other so that they grow their airlines and grow their capacity internally, and that way they'll be strong enough to withstand any foreign onslaught on their aviation industry.
Still on this tack, any benefits of regional integration for the consumer in terms of more direct flights within the region, competitive rates?
Yes, of course. In fact, a recent example is when you look at an airline called Jetlinks here in Kenya. It's now flying from Kisumu in the western parts of Kenya and going to Mwanza in Tanzania. We have seen also Air Uganda. We are here. They're having Uganda Airlines. Air Uganda is thinking of flying to Mombasa from Entebbe, and these are examples of integration that is going to really benefit the consumers, so that they don't have to keep on hopping from one airport to another just to go to destinations which are relatively close to each other. So of course, there's going to be a lot of growth and a lot of consolidation, and we see the market really becoming very diverse. It's going to deepen and also going to widen, and that is going to really help the consumer and also the traders in the area.
Let's talk about the investment models and the financing options, especially for new and private operators in East Africa. One of the things that we haven't seen is a lot of interest from banks to fund airline businesses. We haven't even seen private equity players move into that space. How are these issues being addressed?
I think the main challenge in the East African region is that many of the banks are still not very comfortable with the way the airlines have been run, and also because they don't understand the aviation industry as well as you'd expect, like maybe in the West and maybe in places like in South Africa. So we are seeing, at least now, we've started seeing some airlines actually getting financing from banks, which is a good thing. And we see that in the near future, we're going to see more banks coming into the industry because it's a growth area. We're seeing growth levels of almost close to about 15 to 20%. And I think this is something which is attracting a lot of people actually to start putting their money where it can actually grow and where they can get a good return on their investment. I
mean, continuing on this tack, we know that it is a high-risk investment, as you're suggesting. We also know that exogenous factors such as the volatility of oil prices tends to affect airlines quite negatively, very difficult for them to come up with viable hedging strategies. In a country like Nigeria, for instance, there were calls for the central bank to devise a bailout plan for the aviation sector in the way in which they did for banks. Are there any such measures in East Africa?
I think in East Africa, our airline industry, especially when you look at Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, has been very, very stable. We've not really had any major issues with the airlines, and I think that's why we've not seen any bailouts coming out of East Africa. And I think also because the partner states in the East African region are actually growing at a good rate, that has actually made sure that the growth in the aviation industry also is consistent. So we've not really had any collapses or any liquidity issues with any of the airlines, and that I think that is really helping the industry grow.
All right, now you're quite bullish about growth in East Africa, and we know that improved visitor numbers and tourism figures do back up that case. But now the question is it a question of the strong survive, the biggest entities survive, or the low-cost carriers coming into the fore? Because in a market like South Africa, the low-cost carriers are starting to really present some major competition to the national carrier.
Yes, of course. I think when you look at the African market, just like in the Southeast Asian market, the main thing is that most of the customers are looking at a cheap mode of transport. But I also think that this also has its own limitations in terms of, especially for the long-haul travel. It's very hard to use the low-cost carrier model for long-haul travel. That, of course, is a very big limitation on it. But, of course, we do expect that as more and more low-cost carriers come in, where the industry is going to somehow come to some kind of equilibrium where there'll be a balance between the full-service airlines and also the low-cost airlines.
Okay, your outlook for the sector in 2011, where we expect to see better economic growth globally. Are we going to see more consolidation? There was just a report now of some kind of collaboration between KQ and Qatar Airways. Are you expecting to see more mergers and acquisitions in the sector?
Yes, of course. I think one thing about, like you said it before, the aviation industry is a very high-risk industry, and I think as people try to expand, they'll try to look at who they can partner with and who they can share resources with, so as to ensure that they have consistent growth. In the long run, still the market, the trend seems to be very, very bullish. The way the projections are going out is that there's going to be a lot of growth, averaging not less than 8 to 15%. So with that, we have to wait and see. But I would not rule it out that some players might want to partner up with others so that to build on capacity and also utilize the resources that they have.